Hello, my name is Casey. I've prepared a demonstration to create a site-to-site VPN from your home network into your AWS cloud environment. This is a great, quick example to access private EC2 instances, databases, and other non-public facing resources that are being hosted in AWS. This demo will utilize the free tier of AWS and is an effective, cost-saving alternative to expensive resources like Direct Connect. As you can see in the diagram, I will be utilizing a PC in my home, connected to the public internet, accessing the AWS cloud. In my AWS account, I will be hosting two EC2 instances. The OpenVPN access server will have an elastic, static IP address associated with it, along with a private subnet address. My second instance will be an Amazon Linux 2 AMI that will not have a public IP, and it'll only have an address associated with a private subnet. It will be accessible by other devices on the same private subnet. Connecting my home PC through a secure VPN to the public internet and the private AWS subnet will bridge the connection gap and allow me to connect resources in the private subnet by joining it. First, navigate to the AWS Management Console. From here, we're going to select the Services dropdown and go to EC2. From EC2, we're going to launch an instance. And at the AWS Marketplace, we're going to search for OpenVPN Access Server. This top option here is the one that we want. It'll provide us with two licenses to connect two devices. This is just the usage breakdown for the OpenVPN Access Server. Nothing we really need right here. We're going to select an instance type. The default is T2 small, but we're going to downgrade to the T2 micro to stay within the free tier. There's no noticeable performance hit here. We're going to configure the instance details next. We can stay within the default VPC that's been created. We do want to choose a subnet. The default, it'll choose any one of the subnets available based on your availability zone. We're going to select US East 1B. And we're going to auto assign a public IP. Leave that default there. That's fine. Next, to add storage. Defaults here are fine. Tags, good habit to get into, but not necessary for this demonstration. This is the security group that's set up by default when we select the OpenVPN Access Server AMI. This is all necessary to leave, so the only changes we're going to make, I'm going to clean up the name a little bit. It just shows the version of AWS Access Server. And then I'm going to change the source. The source I'm going to change to come from my IP address. And this is my NATed IP address from my ISP. And this will just make it a little bit more secure so it's not completely open to the internet. We're going to review and launch. The only preparation that I did ahead of time is that I created a VPN demo access key. Simple to do. Make sure you have access to it, or else you won't be able to access your resources. Launch the instance. Okay, this instance is launching. And what I'm going to do next, I'm going to launch the Amazon Linux 2 AMI that's going to stay in the private subnet. I'm going to keep it in the T2 micro tier. We're going to configure the instance details. So once again, we want to select the US East 1B subnet so our two EC2 instances are able to communicate across the private subnet. And one of the other big changes that we're going to make is to disable auto assign a public IP. We don't want this instance to be facing the public internet. Add storage. Defaults are fine. Same with tags and security groups. So I'm going to assign a security group by creating a new one. And I'm just going to leave these default values here. So I want to make sure I have SSH, but I'm going to change this custom IP range. I don't want it to be from anywhere. I want it to be from within the US East 1B subnet. I've gone ahead and looked at VPC settings, and I know that this CIDR range is the CIDR range for US East 1B. So I'm going to plug that IP address in there so I can SSH only from this IP range. And then I'm also going to add a custom ICMP rule that can echo a request coming from the same CIDR range. So I'll just be able to ping this request. I'll just be able to ping this instance. Let's review and launch. Everything looks good. And change it to VPC demo key. Just make sure you know which access key you're using, key pair that you're using. Okay, let's view our instances. So, starting up just fine. And one of the next steps that we want to take is assigning an elastic IP to the OpenVPN access server. And we're going to need this instance ID. So the one that ends in C26. We're going to allocate an elastic IP. It's going to be from US East 1. That's fine. And then make sure that resource is checked. Associate. And then we're going to choose an instance. And that's the C26. Double check. C26. OpenVPN access server. Yep, that's the one we want. And I will associate them. So now this has a static public IP. And this is the IP address that it will be accessible at. Excellent. So let's check our instances. They're both running. Initializing the status checks on the OpenVPN server. Okay, sounds good. Our next step is that we will be SSHing into the OpenVPN server. And I'm going to check out connect. I'm going to need this command. When I open up terminal, I'm going to navigate to where I have my PEM files. And so my PEM files are in there. And that's the name of my PEM file, my key pair. Might not be ready yet. That's okay. There we go. Say yes to connect. So this is just the end user license agreement. Agree to it. And then it's going to go through the setup wizard. So follow along with the options that I configure. I'm going to press enter for the default yes. The second option is please specify the web interface and IP address to be used by the admin web UI. This is also the default 1. Specify the port number. This is something that was set up in the security group, along with the second TCP port for port 443. Then should client traffic be routed default through the VPN? No, we're going to stick with that default as well. Should client DNS traffic be routed by default through the VPN? No. Use local authentication? No, this is the only one that's not the default option. The setup is just going to finish, and then it'll kick us out of the SSH instance. It'll tell us to log in as OpenVPN AS the next time we'd like to connect, just like this. So I'm going to wait for this to time out. Okay, you can see that the connection is closed, and I will change the root to OpenVPN AS. Okay, now you can see I'm logged in as OpenVPN AS at the IP address. And so my next step is I need to set a password in order to access the web GUI. So sudo passwd on the account that was set up, OpenVPN. Okay, the password's been updated successfully. So it is using the OpenVPN user because it was asked as one of the last questions during the setup wizard of, do I wish to log in to the admin UI as OpenVPN? You could have changed another username, but for this example, it was just easiest to leave it as the default option. So next step is, let's go back to Chrome, and I'm going to navigate to this address. Now it's going to say my security certificate's not valid. Well, this is just something that I set up. I trust it. This is just for the sake of the demonstration. So I'm going to proceed, and it's going to go through the admin login. So open VPN and your super secret password. And here we need to accept the end user license agreement once again. And it will bring us to the GUI interface for the OpenVPN access server. This is something I suggest that you get familiar with on your own. Shows you some interesting configuration details, and it's a relatively simple system. So the next step, I'm going to log out, but remove the admin part of the URL and just bring in the user login. And I will use OpenVPN again. And so if you haven't used OpenVPN Access Server, we're trying to download the client right now to connect. So if you click in this option, this is recognizing that I'm running Windows 10, and it'll download OpenVPN Connect for my recommended system. It's available on all these other platforms also. Now, since I already have it downloaded, I only need to download the connection profile. You can see it's there. So I'm going to open my OpenVPN client, navigate to my downloads folder, and I've already demonstrated this earlier, so I will choose this client that I've just downloaded. Make sure my information is correct in here. I'm going to save my password just for simplicity. Okay, let's connect. And as simple as that, I am now connected to the OpenVPN access server that's being hosted in AWS. And if I scroll down here, it'll show I have a connection, I have an IP in the private subnet now. This 172.27.232.2 is within the 17.16.00/20 subnet, the US East 1B subnet. Okay, so let's try this out. Let's see if I'm connected and see if I can ping some of these resources. So I'm going to select the AWS Linux 2 instance, go to networking. Oh, sorry. I can just see the private IP address up here. So I'm going to copy it. Bring up my console again. I'm going to do ping -t for a continuous ping, this IP address. It is a private IP address of my Linux instance. Awesome. I am now receiving ICMP communication from that resource. Okay, So I'm connected to the OpenVPN. What happens if I interrupt this connection? Well, this will prove that I was connected to the private subnet. So let's interrupt it. It should time out momentarily. And as simple as that. It's going to time out a couple more times. Then let's reestablish connection. It'll give me an error, a ping failure, then it'll pick back up. Just like that. Excellent. So now we know we can ping the server, but let's go one step further. Let's SSH into it. So I'm going to go to connect. Connect. And copy this command. Since this is the first time connecting, yes. And there it is. This is my Amazon Linux 2 AMI EC2 instance. And if I do an IP address, it'll show, okay, there's my loopback interface and my Ethernet 2 interface. It only has the 172.31.17.221/20. This is the same subnet that we allocated on start. And so, as simple as that, that is setting up a OpenVPN access server to access privately hosted resources in AWS. The final part of this demonstration, I'm going to clean up the work that I did so I don't get charged for resources that I leave running. Go back to EC2, go to my running instances, select all my resources because these are the only ones that I have running. I'm going to click the instance state dropdown and terminate both of my instances. So if I refresh here, they'll go from the running state to the terminating state. Change my filter. There we go. Shutting down. Okay. Then the other resource I allocated would be the Elastic IP. So I have that resource checked. I'm going to disassociate. Because I was terminating the instances, it was giving me that error. So after a refresh, I'm going to just release the Elastic IP address since it's no longer associated with an EC2 instance. And that resource has been released. Instances, they're terminating. All right. Thank you very much for joining me in this demonstration.